Death. Death is a tricky topic. Most people are reluctant to entertain the idea of their own death. They consider death to be a pessimistic and morbid subject for contemplation. Even talking about it openly can be considered a bad omen, as though merely giving voice to death can somehow conjure it up. As a result of this uneasiness, the meditation methods commonly taught in the West have shifted away from examining the hard truths of existence. Instead, they emphasize cultivating pleasant mental states. These methods encourage practitioners to focus on mental images that give pleasure to the senses. Death meditation, therefore, is an unpopular choice, one which is rarely taken up as a subject for contemplation in a systematic and sustained manner. For this reason, a wide gap has developed between the obvious fact of death's inevitability and the degree of reflection being devoted to this important matter. We like to think of life and death as opposites. Life is happening now, while death will happen later on at the end of the road. Whereas in truth, we face the certainty of our death from the moment we are born. In spite of that truth, and because of our intoxication with life, we become adept at disregarding this unpleasant fact. In our daily lives, we rarely see dead bodies, much less the process of dying, because it usually happens out of sight behind closed doors in the privacy of hospitals and nursing homes, where the experience of death has been sanitized and corpses are made to look natural, as though death were some kind of mistake that needs to be covered up. All of which helps to keep the disagreeable fact of death out of our consciousness. And meanwhile, we spend our lives in constant pursuit of wealth, knowledge, status, and praise from others. In this endless chase after worldly things, we create a false sense of refuge as we try to hide from what can never be avoided. But what are we hiding from? We're hiding from the basic truths that apply to every human being, that this body must age, that it must fall sick, and that it must finally die. No amount of possessions or achievements can change these facts. A certain veiled arrogance comes with this attitude. Although other people may be old, ill, dying, or already dead, we ourselves are alive and well. We will simply deal with those problems later when the time comes. But no guaranteed right to long life has ever existed. Death is not waiting for us at the end of a long journey. It is walking along beside us our whole lives. When the end does arrive, death will clean the slate of all our acquisitions, including our personal history, and everything we identify as me or mine. Everything we consider to be me, my memories, my achievements, my carefully constructed self-image, all will be wiped away by death. Instinctively, we harbor a lot of anxiety about sickness, aging, and death. Anxiety that saps our vitality as we expend so much energy denying those inescapable truths. Ironically, everyone knows they are going to die, but they act as though they don't believe it. What would change if they truly accepted that this breath might be their last, not just rationally but deeply in their hearts? Would they waste time on petty grievances? Would they postpone their spiritual practice for some imagined future that might never arrive? No. If they honestly believed in their own death, they would live their lives differently. Awareness of the inevitability of death means always being prepared to face that moment calmly and mindfully. When people accept that they can die at any time, the activities they normally waste their time on will appear trivial. They'll naturally become more involved in the quality of the life they are living, and their priorities are bound to shift as they make more room in their lives for spiritual pursuits. The things that previously seemed so important, the promotions, the social status, the material acquisitions, these begin to look rather hollow. In their stead, they develop an interest in what really matters, investigating with wisdom, cultivating compassion, understanding the nature of the mind. They learn to value the reflection on death and make it a daily practice. Each day they foster the awareness that this day could be their last, and then question how ready for that moment they actually are. Am I doing all I need to do? Am I being the person I want to be? The truth is, once they learn how to die, they learn how to live as well. Facing the reality of death enables people to appreciate the importance of living, inspiring them to develop a whole new way to make the best use of the valuable time they have left. The Buddha strongly emphasized death contemplation to spur people toward genuine spiritual practice. When you know that death is certain but its timing is uncertain, you naturally want to put your house in order. You stop postponing your meditation, stop making excuses, and stop waiting for some perfect future moment that never arrives. In this way, death is a profound teacher. When you truly understand that each moment could be your last, you start paying attention to how you live. You become more careful with your speech, more mindful of your actions, more aware of the moods of your mind. You start living with purpose instead of just passing time. The irony here is that by fully accepting death, you become more fully alive. When you stop running from death, you start understanding life. You begin to live with presence and real dedication. This is the profound teaching that death offers you, not as some vague possibility, but as an immediate and practical truth. So don't try to push death away. Don't treat it as some distant future event. Bring death close. Make friends with it. Let it teach you how to live. Because in the end, understanding death is understanding life itself. This principle lies at the heart of Buddhist practice. It's not about pursuing an endless stream of pleasurable experiences, nor trying to fabricate some kind of perfect, unchanging condition. But rather, Buddhist practice is about seeing things as they actually are, in their true nature. Think about it for a moment. What does death mean? What will happen when you reach the hour of death? Try to visualize it. Consider the body. What happens when the body dies? When the body dies, all sensation goes with it. Sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch all vanish. Normal perceptions of the external world disappear. Your worldly possessions are lost completely. You will not retain control over the slightest part of them. That being the case, why place so much importance on your belongings? Why be so concerned about what others think of you? Why be so anxious about your social status or your professional position? When you are well aware of death's certainty, the significance of such matters begins to diminish. In light of that new understanding, you no longer feel sad or upset when your possessions eventually do change or disappear. What exactly happens when death takes place? The body shuts down, that's what happens. All the senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, they all stop completely. Everything you've been experiencing through these senses your entire life vanishes in an instant. Just think about that. One moment you're here, experiencing the world through bodily sensations, and the next, nothing. Just a sensory void. And what about all your possessions? Your money, your house, your car, your clothes, what happens to them? You can't take them with you, can you? Not a penny, not a single souvenir. Everything remains behind. So, why do you spend your whole life collecting these things and worrying about them? Why do you get so worked up about your reputation and your position in society? Look at it squarely. When you're lying there on your deathbed, Will any of these things truly matter? Will you be thinking about the possessions you own? Of course not. You'll be facing something far more immediate and consequential. What does it mean to own something anyway? What does it mean to make something mine? Who is this me that owns so much? People do not realize, until they are on their deathbed and everything external falls away, that possessions have no connection with who they are. When death approaches, the whole notion of ownership is revealed as utterly meaningless. Throughout people's lives, the essence of who they are has been largely obscured by their identification with material objects. Then death comes, and suddenly it's all stripped away. When that happens, leaving nothing of the material world to cling to, who are they then? The Buddha declared that just as the footprint of the elephant is supreme among all the footprints in the forest, so too is mindfulness of death supreme among all mindfulness practices. Death is mentioned frequently in the Buddha's teaching. It is obviously a vital part of the general importance the Buddha gave to understanding the nature of impermanence, constant change, and the uncertainty they bring. Reflection on the truth that everything which arises also passes away is central to the practice of death awareness. Every time we contemplate death, we are prompted to acknowledge the impermanent nature of everything in this world, especially the things we hold dear. This knowledge deepens the understanding of our purpose in life. When practiced in earnest, meditation on death serves as a vehicle for developing states of calm and concentration. With proper guidance, focusing on perceptions of death as objects of concentration can unify the mind in a state of samadhi. When the mind is attuned to the truth that death comes to everyone, rich and poor, famous and unknown, good and bad, strong empathy arises for humanity's common experience of this type of suffering. A knowledge arises that this is something we all face together. The mind naturally becomes unified as it focuses on this universal truth. The advantage of awareness of death, most emphasized by the Buddha, was the one he himself experienced: a powerful motivation to practice for the attainment of enlightenment. When the Buddha embarked on his quest for Dhamma, one of his most influential experiences was the sight of a fresh corpse, which prompted in his mind the realization that he, too, must surely die. Spurred on by feelings of urgency and resolve, he set out to discover that which does not age, does not sicken, and does not die, the end of all suffering, nibbana. Because it constitutes a path to enlightenment, the Buddha encouraged people to contemplate, deeply investigate, and directly understand the nature of death for themselves. Bringing forth a profound sense of urgency, what the Buddha called samvega, is a key step on the path of Buddhist practice. In fact, that samvega experience is considered a sign that the mindfulness of death meditation is bearing fruit. It arises as an urgent need to seek a secure refuge that grows out of a heightened awareness of the fragile nature of human life. It is expressed as a deep feeling of shock and dismay, coupled with a comprehension that not only does life not last forever, but that the way we are living our life is misguided. When we truly grasp the urgency of our situation, it transforms our entire outlook. The mind begins to turn away from worldly concerns and moves naturally toward Dhamma practice. Even if we do not renounce the household life, this understanding brings fresh energy to our meditation. We find that the old preoccupations with comfort, status, and material gain lose their compelling force. They are seen clearly as impediments rather than aspirations. At this stage, the Buddha's teachings cease to be mere concepts and become living truths that guide our actions. This marks the beginning of genuine practice, a time when the mind, formerly enslaved by its own selfish concerns, starts to orient itself toward nibbana. It is the difference between merely wishing for freedom and actually walking the path toward it. The contemplation of death as a meditation practice leads us to profound insights about the true nature of existence. When we look deeply into it, we begin to see that what we call death is merely an illusion, a conventional designation that masks a deeper truth. The truth that nothing actually dies in the universe, rather that all phenomena undergo continuous transformation. Consider the physical body, that collection of elements we identify with so strongly. When the body dies, all its physical properties return to their elemental states, which then merge with the earth and rejoin the vegetable and animal kingdoms from where they came. Even though corpses decay and disintegrate, not an atom or a molecule of their makeup is ever lost. The whole of it returns to the material world and merges with the organic matter that creates new life forms. Not a shred of physical matter is destroyed. It merely undergoes a phase of change and rejuvenation. Therefore, the notion that the physical body dies in any final way is an illusion, a false understanding based on a failure to see the all-pervasive nature of constant change. Death is the epitome of that impermanence. A living body is an aggregate of material substances that are nourished by nutrients like food, water, and air, which are essential for the maintenance of life and growth. This combination of disparate material elements is ultimately held together by the presence of a non-material, life-giving and animating force. When that animating principle eventually relinquishes its grasp, a living organism can no longer survive because the cohesion which kept the physical elements together has departed. At the same time, the mental faculties that make up the personality, dependent as they are on the physical body as their base, also lose their cohesiveness as the mental energies that comprise them merge with the sentient universe. Mental activity comprised of feelings, perceptions, memories, thoughts and emotions is no longer viable without the animating principle that binds them together with the body. But mental faculties are not entirely lost either, because their vitality unites with other sentient properties in the universe to regenerate. What remains after the physical aggregate disintegrates and disperses back into its natural elements, and the mental aggregates disperse into the mental sphere, are the karmic consequences created during the lifetime of the person who has just died. Those causes and conditions for future birth are carried along in the consciousness continuum of the animating principle which departs the physical and mental aggregates at the time of death. This potential for future existence will eventually create and then live on in a new set of aggregates, into which the animating force will again breathe life. To that extent, there is no power in the universe that can put an end to the force that powers the cycle of life and death. Everything in the universe is living and evolving without beginning or end. Life and death are simply the pendulum swings of continuous change. What persists through this endless change is karma, the accumulated causes and conditions created by our actions of body, speech, and thought. Like a flame passing from the wick of one candle to that of another, the animating force of consciousness carries forward these karmic seeds. Though the physical and mental aggregates have dispersed, this causal continuum flows on, eventually manifesting in new combinations of elements and energies. This is why the Buddha spoke of karma as the true inheritance that is carried forward, not a birthright of some permanent self or soul. The process of death and rebirth is fundamental to understanding the Buddha's teaching. To fully grasp what happens at death, we must first understand that throughout our lives we produce karma, both good karma and bad karma. One of the important factors behind the karma we make is craving for life, craving for existence now and in the future. When we die, the karma that we made based on that craving remains viable. It is that karma that passes the flame from one life to the next. The karma of craving existence creates the patisandhi vijnana, or the consciousness that relinks to the next birth. In other words, the citta, with the addition of karma from the past, becomes the vijnana experienced at the moment of death. When that happens, the citta carries the totality of past karma forward as it awaits its future destination. The person who died no longer exists. That flame was extinguished. A new flame is lit in the form of the potential future results of our past actions that are carried along with the conscious continuum of the citta, including the craving for existence which will seek a future birth. Once the craving latches onto a new potential for life, then karma keeps the ball rolling in the form of that new life. The citta is the vehicle that carries the future potential, but the karma is the crucial factor in determining the form and quality of the new birth. The profound truth that emerges through deep contemplation is that nothing truly dies because nothing exists as a permanent, separate entity to begin with. What we call death is simply one manifestation of the universal characteristic of impermanence. A profound understanding of this truth will begin to loosen the bonds of attachment. The relationship between death, birth, and attachment reveals a profound understanding of existence's cyclical nature. In the Buddha's teaching, death isn't considered as a terminal point, but as an integral part of a continuous process, closely interwoven with birth through the principles of dependent origination. This teaching illustrates how our fundamental attachment to existence creates the conditions for both birth and death. When we grasp at life, desperately trying to solidify our existence and create permanence where there is none, we ironically ensure our own death. This is because anything that comes into being must, by its very nature, cease to be. Our very attempt to hold on to life creates the conditions for its loss. The Buddha's emphasis on death contemplation in the Satipatthana Sutta was not intended to be either morbid or pessimistic. Instead, it was designed as a powerful tool for understanding the very nature of existence. By deeply contemplating death, we begin to see how our own attachment to existence actually perpetuates the cycle of birth and death. We can observe how the mind creates a sense of self that appears to be solid and permanent when, in fact, it is in a constant state of flux. This contemplation reveals an even deeper truth. Our fear of death and our attachment to life are two faces of the same coin. Both arise from a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. We grasp existence because we fear death, and because we grasp life, we ensure future deaths. This is why the Buddha taught that freedom from suffering comes not from trying to escape death, but from understanding and accepting its inevitability as part of the natural order. The practice of death contemplation serves multiple purposes. It helps us develop mindfulness of impermanence, it reduces attachment to the body and material existence, and it leads to a deeper understanding of how our own mental patterns perpetuate the round of birth and death. When we start to understand that death doesn't stand in opposition to life, but is actually part of life's very nature, our relationship with both living and dying begins to transform. This understanding connects directly to the Noble Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. Our attachment to existence, tanha, is identified as the cause of suffering in the second Noble Truth. By seeing how this attachment creates the conditions for both birth and death, we begin to understand the path to enlightenment. Release comes not from trying to achieve immortality or escape death, but from letting go of the very attachment that makes death inevitable. But don't take anyone's word for this. Look into your own heart when you think about death. Notice the resistance, the turning away. This is where real meditation on death begins, with honestly facing your own mortality. When you do this consistently, something unexpected happens. The very thing you feared becomes a doorway to freedom. By fully accepting the truth of death, you begin to let go of your desperate clinging to life. This is the path the Buddha discovered, using death itself to transcend the fear of death. By watching closely the nature of change in your own body and mind, you begin to understand this truth of the Buddha's teaching. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought demonstrates the truth of impermanence. Death is not something that happens once at the end of life. It's walking behind you every step you take. So, will you continue to hide from it and pretend it's not looking over your shoulder? Or will you let it wake you up to the preciousness of each moment, to the urgency of Buddhist practice, and to the importance of living with wisdom and clear understanding?